Hi, I'm Dr. Erica Latcher from Spring Hill Equine and straight from the horse doctor's mouth. Today we're going to talk about the neurologic exam. A lot of times we wonder, is a horse lame or neurologic? We recently did a podcast on that. It's in season 5, early on in the season. But the question is an easy one when the horse is really neurologic, like we're looking at something that unfortunately has eastern encephalitis or other devastating neurologic diseases. It becomes harder when we're trying to determine, is this horse subtly neurologic or is this horse lame? So I'm going to go over a little bit of what we do for the neurologic exam, and you can actually do a lot of this at home, and then you know the baseline your horse has, and you can see if things are changing. So we always start neuro exams with the head, and that's because that's where the brain is. We use something called the 12 cranial nerves to evaluate function of the brain. And to do that, we're going to evaluate some things about the head and how they respond to touch and to movement. But the first thing I look at is I look at her head straight on and I say, okay, is it even? I'm going to look at her nose. It's not pointed one side or the other. It's straight, basically, on her head. That makes a big deal. And then we're going to look at her nostrils and see, do they open the same amount? Piper's being super cooperative and sort of firing them for us here. Is she doing that evenly on both sides, or is one side doing more than the other? Now, they can turn, like there she's doing her right a little bit more, but she'll also do them evenly. So that's a really big deal. I'm going to open her mouth just a little bit and see, where is her tongue? I'm going to evaluate it on both sides and see that her tongue is sitting in the middle of her mouth, and hers is. I'm also going to make her move her tongue a little bit and see that you saw she kind of stuck it out a little bit. She was able to move it. She was able to put it back in her mouth. Again, neurologic sign. I also am going to give her a treat. We're not going to do that now, but I basically just want to know that she can eat and she can swallow. Those are 2 to 3, thank you, Piper. Those are 2 to 3 cranial nerves involved in that function. So we want to make sure she can do that. Next, I'm just going to see, I'm going to take my hands and I'm going to see how symmetrical she is. So I'm going to run my hands over the big muscles of her forehead, kind of palpate the base of her ears if she'll let me. And then I'm just going to run down her face and make sure that everything I feel on each side and underneath is even to my hands. Can I, do I feel like things are symmetrical? If they aren't, I'm going to do a closer evaluation with my eyes, and it may point me in a direction where I'm going to look with other imaging like ultrasound or x-ray. But to start with, your hands are great at telling you, are things symmetrical? And so you just get a feel over the entire horse. Next, I'm going to use my finger to poke places that she's probably not going to like. And this is checking to see, can she feel where I'm poking with my finger, and is she responding appropriately? And again, this is testing different nerves coming off the base of the brain. So I'm going to stick I'm going to stick my finger in her nose, and you can see she reacts. That's very normal. I'm going to touch the corner of her eyes, and I like to touch both because they have different nerves that go to them. So you can see she's blinking in response to that. That's very normal. I'm also going to stick my finger in her ears. And it's funny because some of them you have to stick your finger in their ears. And some of them, like Piper here, you saw I just barely touched her, and she definitely let me know she could feel that. Then I'm going to do, it's kind of a down and dirty vision test. It's called the menace exam. And it's where you take your hand and you head towards the eye. What you want to be careful of here is I don't want to touch long eyelashes because that can stimulate the blink response because she feels something coming at her. I also don't want to move my hand really fast because I don't want to create an air current. So I'm just going to boop. And some of them don't blink when you do that. They're like, you're not coming at me. So on those guys, what I'll do is kind of come up, touch their eye, and then do it again to see if I can get them to blink. You keep doing it, and you can see Piper's like, yeah, you're not going to touch me. So sometimes you do have to actually get them touch to get them to blink. See if oh, that was a good one. There we go. She does it really well on this side. So you can see on the menace test, you want to judge them off of the first one or two that you do, not when you've sat here for a few minutes doing it, because they very quickly are like, yeah, whatever, I got what you're doing. So that is our evaluation of the cranial nerves, and then we'll move on to the rest of the body. One of the other ways that we can do a broad test of how the nerves are doing is what we call the panniculus response. And that is when horses kind of shake their skin to get flies to move. So we can recreate that on the trunk and get an idea of how all the nerves coming off the spine are doing. And basically the way you do that, we just basically run our finger down and see if she's responding by shaking her skin just like that. You can also try it. You can sometimes see it in other places on these guys, but the big thing is that we want to see that skin shake, and that tells us that the nerves along the spinal column are actually functioning okay. A lot of this isn't really a big deal for what we see for the subtle performance changes with neurologic symptoms, but it is for horses who have more profound diseases like Eastern encephalitis or the herpes, the EHM that we worry about with these guys. So these can be early things that change on those horses. If you go to the human doctor and they want to know if you're having trouble with what we call proprioception, they'll ask you how you're doing walking up and down stairs, or if you're tripping a lot, like catching your toe going up and down things. And proprioception is just our fancy word for, even without looking at my hand, I know where it is in space. Or without being directly staring at my toes, I know where they are and what they're doing. It's difficult sometimes to ask horses, is this what's going on? And we can have a lot of different reasons that they're tripping, but changes in proprioception are one of the big ones. So one of the ways that we do that is we take the legs and we cross them. And you can see she doesn't want to let me do it. You can also see why I picked her for this, because I can stand in front of her and do this. Usually what I recommend is you stand to the side and ask them to do it. And we do it both ways. So we do both feet, asking them to cross both of them. And see, she was a little slow to replace that one, but that's okay. That's not a big deal. And also, I will say some horses, we can do this in the hind feet too, but it is funny. You know, so we have to watch. Here's an issue that we've got. We teach horses that we want to train them to do something. So Piper now thinks I'm training her to do this. So if you do this too often, your horse will learn that what you want is for them to cross their legs. So be careful that you're not doing it every day. This is, you know, an every once in a while sort of thing. The other way you can tell how they do with it is, I was about to say, you can push on them and see, do they realize that their foot's in the wrong place? So that's the other way we'll do this test, is I'll say, okay, let me take your foot and try to place it somewhere uncomfortable, and let me see what happens. So you guys may not be able to see that, but she's shifting. There she goes. She's shifting her weight to put her leg more appropriately underneath her. Piper is trained to be stood up for halter, so in some ways she thinks that she's supposed to be doing what I'm doing, but she took her body and put it back so that it's over where her legs are, and that's normal. So that's normal neurologic behavior. So we can do the same test on the hind legs, and it's just a matter of bringing the leg across. What I will say is often they'll do like Piper here, where see how I put it there, and she says, oh, okay, you want it there. Much more common for them to do this in hind legs than front legs, where they'll just let us put it there. But if you ask them to put weight on it, they'll typically replace it just like that. So that's normal behavior, where I asked her to put some weight on that leg. And she said, I can't do that there, dummy. And that's what we want her to feel, is that she can't put weight on that leg there. So again, so you see how she replaced it. And these are all little tiny things you can look at on a regular basis. Like I said, don't do it every day, because then they think we're training them to cross their legs. So I do it every once in a while if I have doubts about what a horse is doing and how they're moving. Okay, so now we've done the standing portion of the exam. We want to see how they move out in the wild. So This is a pretty straightforward thing. I'll watch them walk and trot often on videos. I'll have owners just send me video of them doing their normal thing. And you can do this too, especially if your horse is tripping a lot. That for me is a big one of, is it lame or is it neurologic? So I will watch them moving and see when they trip if I can identify a reason why. But I can also do a lot of things just standing here with a halter and lead rope. So for instance, I'm going to ask Piper to turn, and I want to see that she moves her legs appropriately. She's not standing on herself. And I'm doing this relatively slowly at the moment, and then I'll speed it up. And I want to make sure I do it both directions. So we're going to go the other direction. Do, 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 do. And you can see she's crossing her legs over. And that's what I want to see, is that there's a cross to front and hind. Not necessarily at the same time. It's okay if it's not. And then we're just going to walk in a straight line. Make sure she can do that well. And that she can turn one direction at the end of that straight line. And I'll do sort of a shallow figure 8. And you can see I often do them just this way, walking backwards so that I can see what they're doing. I come to the other end, I ask them to turn the other direction. And once I'm happy with that, and I'll also, again, you saw I'll walk her forward. And then I just see how they stop. Most horses will not stop like this, right? They stop and they put themselves somewhat underneath themselves so that they can balance their weight. Just like you don't want to stop and stand like this, they don't want to stop and stand like that either. And if they do, that's a pretty good sign that something from the brain to the legs is not going well. The next thing I'll do is ask for a faster turn. And one of the things about Piper here is that she does have some neck arthritis. So if you watch her turn, the legs do okay, but she doesn't turn her neck very well. And that is, so while she's not neurologic, she definitely has some stiffness in her neck. So you can see I'm asking her to speed things up just to see if I can make something go wrong, and it's not. The other thing you'll notice is I'm pulling on the lead rope, but then I'm letting go. Because I want to see what she does when she's not being supported by when she doesn't have me supporting her head. And then we're going to do that the other way. And again, you want to get this going relatively fast. So that you can see, yes, she is crossing. And she's doing it relatively quickly and doing well. What am I looking for? In a neuro horse, very quickly, even subtly neurologic horses, when you step up the speed of that circle, they will start stepping all over themselves. The other thing you'll see some of them do is weird stuff with their head and neck to try to counterbalance where their body is telling them their weight is weird, but they can't quite figure out why. So maybe they don't know where their right hind is. They'll start to take their head and turn it towards that right hind to help put the weight where they think it needs to be. You know, the brain and the body work really well together to manage weight. And it's a system we all have that we don't even realize we have. But the body will work hard to correct it so that you stay in an appropriate standing position. So you're going to look for some of the compensations that these guys do. And again, if you do a horse on a regular basis, then you'll know what's normal for yours. Like I said, for Piper, I know that she's going to be really stiff through her neck, both directions, because she does have some neck arthritis. Backing is a relatively complicated neurologic behavior. It requires the coordination of a lot of things. So I will then add backing. What I'm going for is that they're backing fast enough that they're backing correctly. And backing correctly is diagonal pairs going together. So backing is basically trotting backwards. So we're going to take her, ask her to back up, and I'm going to ask her to back fast enough that her diagonal pairs are moving. And you can see they don't move 100% together. So for me, this would be a little bit of a concern that we've got something very subtle going on with her. We can try, you can try sometimes speeding things up horses will let you back them very slowly, right? So if I back her slow, they don't always go diagonal pairs when you go really slow. So that's why, see how she's sort of not moving correctly, right? But that's why when you do this, you want to have your back going fast enough that they have to do it correctly. So, and if in doubt, I speed the back up to see how they're doing. And typically I have someone else do it so that I can see it from the side, or I set my camera up, like I have my trusty cameraman today, and then I go back and watch it and see how they're doing. To me, once we sped her up, she did okay. So that would be like, let me investigate that further, and let's add some speed and difficulty to it and see how she does. I love terrain for the next step of my neuro exam, because again, everything we're doing, we're trying to add difficulty, and we can do that with speed and we can do it with terrain. So in Florida, sometimes the hard part is finding terrain because we just don't have a ton of it, but we happen to have this wash here at the house, so come on. So I'll ask them to walk just normal, kind of up and down. Sometimes the hard part is I trip with this. Up and down a hill, and I see how they do. The other thing I'll do if I have questions is I'll put a rider on for this and see how they do handling weight going up and down. And you do not need much of a hill to create this effect. And if you want to see a pretty dramatic one, see if Piper will let us do this. She may not be my best model for this, but I hold the head up and I do the same thing. And what that does, that was very normal, but it changes the way the vertebrae in the neck are angled. And if you have some neurologic issues from like a wobbler, which is a malformation in the neck, or other subtle neuro things in the neck, changing the orientation of the neck and adding a hill makes it light up like a neon sign. So I do that both directions. See how she misplaced that foot a little bit? And I'm forgiving of once or twice, because if you think about you walking up a hill, looking up at the sky, it's not the easiest thing in the world. So I'll let them have little tiny kind of placing issues. But when you see a neurologic horse do it, crazy. One of the things they'll do is you have their head up and you're asking them to walk on the hill, and you'll see their front legs literally do this because they have no idea where it is in space and they can't necessarily feel the feedback from the ground. So they get what we call searching behavior, where the leg is sort of doing this until they have to have it fall down. It's pretty darn obvious. So again, use your terrain to your advantage. And if it's really, really subtle, get on them, ride them up and down a hill at slow speeds and see if things get worse. If it does, that's a really good indication that you've got some neck issues going on. All right, so we've added terrain with a hill. Now we're gonna add terrain with poles. I do this a little bit different than if you've watched our star pattern video. I am not asking them to really think about this. I wanna see what happens when they just do what they do. So I ask them, and I usually do this on the ground, or if they're trained to do like groundwork, I will lunge them over the poles basically. But I get them going, and then we're just gonna walk over the poles. And again, nothing much happened, which is good. We're gonna go the other way too. Because just because it's good on one side doesn't mean it's good on the other. And we're gonna see how she does. And Piper did great. I'm showing you a neurologically normal horse, so not necessarily getting you the best view of bad things, but you see how she knew where her feet were, she had appropriate reactions to the poles, and she was able to pick up and place based on where the poles were and where her feet were. And that's all normal. Again, you'll take these neurologic horses, run through this, and they'll spread the poles all over the place. So you can use just all the things in your environment to get an idea on how your horse is doing. Sometimes the question of is it lame or is it neurologic is a really hard one. Getting baseline answers like this from this neurologic exam can really help you give your veterinarian great information for where to go next with diagnostic testing. As always, I want to give a big shout out to our patrons. We can't do what we do without you guys. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. If you've got any questions, drop them down below and we will do our best to get them answered for you.